Hi, I'm Michelle, the Irritable Vegan. I'm here to share my vegan low FODMAP journey and hopefully take some of the BS out of IBS. Now today I'd like to share with you some pantry staples and recipes for using up whatever you have to hand. Now I'm going to try and make these tips as general as possible so that they apply to every vegan low FODMAP kitchen whenever you might be watching this, but I also want to make it specific enough that it's going to be of some real help to you during these very unusual times that we find ourselves in. Now before we begin, I just want to say that in no way am I encouraging you to rush out and buy everything that I'm going to show you today. Rather, what I want you to do is think about experimenting with possibly the things that you find at the back of your cupboard that you may not have had the confidence to use before, or that you may not be overly familiar with, and also to come up with maybe some new ways of using up ingredients that you may find yourself needing to cook with day after day after day. Practically everything that you see here today are items that I already had in stock. And that's just due to the nature of the types of videos that I make here on YouTube and also to my normal eating preferences. I didn't purposely go out and buy any of these things solely with the intention of making this video, and everything I'm going to show you today are things that I use on a weekly, if not a daily basis. I last visited my local Aldi just over a week ago, and I have to say they were fantastically well stocked, and I really do think they're doing a marvellous job. Here in the UK, we've had some strict measures put in place to avoid the likelihood of people panic buying, and I for one am genuinely really grateful for those measures, even though they came a little bit too late in my opinion. So please make sure that wherever you are, wherever you're watching from, you're taking advice from your local government and you're acting accordingly. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Before we get started, I just want to explain a little bit more about how this mini-series is going to work. This was originally filmed as one video but ended up being way too long, so I decided to break it up into sections. Each section will feature different types of pantry staples with low FODMAP tips and recipe ideas for how to make the best of them. I'm hoping to release one section per day for the next week, so by the end of the week we'll in effect have an entire pantry staple tour broken down into sections. By doing it this way, it's going to be much easier for you to find the section that applies to the ingredients that you have available. Now, because this was intended to be one video, each section will feature the same intro and outro, and that's because each section in the series needs to work as a standalone video. Because some people may only ever watch one episode, it all needs to make sense. If you'll be watching more than one video in the series, and I really hope that you do, I'll pop a timestamp in the description box so that once you've seen the intro on the first video, you can skip straight to the content on the rest. The only thing that you do need to know is that the video clips playing over this part of the intro will change depending on what we're talking about. So if you prefer seeing some visual inspiration for recipes, you might still want to watch this part. As the series progresses, make sure that you check the description box, because as each video releases, I'll be leaving a link to it below, and also the recipes, videos and resources that I linked to will change to reflect the ingredients featured each day. I hope all that makes sense, and I really hope you find this series helpful. And now, let's get into it. So one of the most versatile ingredients that you can have in your pantry are porridge oats. These are typical standard rolled oats. And in terms of purely FODMAPs, these are perfectly safe. They have a really generous safe serving size of half a cup of uncooked oats. Some people will need to use the gluten-free varieties, but for the majority of people, regular oats should be fine. They're usually pretty cheap and typically usually easy to get hold of. Obviously that might be a little bit different at the moment. And they really can take you from breakfast right through to supper. Now obviously we're all used to making a porridge with them, and that can be made with water if you don't have any milk available, and just maybe a little bit of sweetener. If you don't have milk available, you can actually make your own using oats. So it's typically just oats, some filtered water and a little bit of sweetener. Unfortunately here in the UK, for some reason, our safe serving of oat milk is really quite small. So if you are based in the UK, that's something you might need to be aware of and may need to be careful with. If you're based outside of the UK, then just double check the Monash app to see what your safe serving is. I think it's up to half a cup, which would be more than enough, mixed with some water to make a really decent sweet porridge. One of my favourite ways to use the oats is in an overnight oats. So I'll mix the dried oats with milk or yoghurt. I'll whiz up some frozen berries. I'll drizzle over some peanut butter, put everything together, and I usually make enough to last me 3 days. Usually about a cup of oats is enough to last me for 3 days. By the time you get to day 3, it's so creamy and decadent. It's literally like eating a dessert for breakfast. So if you've never tried it, now might be a really good time to try the overnight oats. You can also make a homemade granola with nuts and seeds and maybe a little bit of maple syrup, some safe servings of dried fruit. Obviously just keep double checking the app so that you make sure that you're staying within FODMAP limits. If you can't be bothered with that, if that's too much trouble, then just toasting up some of these on the hob and sprinkling them over yoghurt and fresh fruit can just give that breakfast, what's typically quite a light breakfast, a little bit of a nutritional boost. Speaking of nutritional boosters, I like to add these into smoothies. So typically on the low FODMAP diet, you're advised to use 1 piece of fruit, which obviously isn't going to make a huge amount of smoothie. So I tend to add 1/4 cup of oats, and I'll then mix that with my milk, yoghurt, water, fruit, whatever else I'm using, maybe a bit of peanut butter, and then that helps to bulk out the smoothie, up the protein content of it, and just make it a bit richer, a bit creamier and a bit thicker. Flapjacks are really easy to make, just with some maple syrup, some oats and maybe some chopped nuts. I also have a recipe somewhere on the channel for some no-bake chocolate oat cookies, which are really good. I've seen lots of recipes online for simple 2 or 3 ingredient pancakes using oats as the base and usually mashing up with a banana. I really like savoury oats, so if you're sick of all the sweet oat recipes, then something like a savoury oat dal is really, really nourishing, really comforting. It can be eaten any time of the day. And also something like a savoury flapjack, which uses some sun-dried tomatoes, some herbs, some spices, some olives, and I have a recipe for that as well somewhere on the channel if you want to take a look for that. Oats are really a great way of binding ingredients together. So if you were trying to make some homemade burgers or meatballs, then adding oats into that is a really good way to bulk it out and to bind it. Obviously, if you're making something like that from lentils, you have to stick to quite a small, safe serving. So the oats combined with the lentils are probably going to give you a much more substantial burger, help it all to hold together so it doesn't all break apart when you're cooking it. It can also be used as a thickener, so in things like soups and stews, if you haven't got a lot of ingredients to use, sometimes they can end up being a bit thin and a bit brothy. So putting some porridge oats in there or some porridge oats on the top, popping it in the oven and let them go crispy, that could work really nicely to help bulk out main meals. And you can also finally just use them as a coating in place of breadcrumbs. So you can just whiz them up a little bit and you can use them to coat the outside of burgers, meatballs if you haven't used them inside. You could use them as a breading for tofu. Basically any way that you would normally use a breadcrumb, you could also use the oats. So they really are a versatile ingredient to have on hand. And now's definitely the time to start experimenting with them if there's something that you've previously avoided or believed that you weren't very good at digesting. If you keep it to small amounts, from 1/4 cup to 1/2 cup, then you might be pleasantly surprised that you can actually tolerate them better than you expected. So there you have it. Now I've really tried to make sure that all of these tips apply to your vegan low FODMAP pantry whenever, wherever you're watching this from. But obviously at this moment in time, I really hope that these tips are going to serve you well. Please take care of yourself and your family, buy only what you need and what you're realistically going to use over the coming weeks. I think we can all agree that our retail workers at the minute are doing a hell of a job. Please let's not make their job any harder than it needs to be. I'm pretty certain that most of them would much rather be at home, safe and sound with their loved ones. Please reach out to me in the comments below to share your tips with the rest of our little community, and also to ask for any recipe advice, any meal ideas or inspiration that you may need. You can check out the other videos and playlists that I have available. I really think that some of them are going to be useful to you now and in the future. As always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye!